died that very night. And before the following dawn, Buttercup and Humperdinck were married.
My father's final words were, "Love her as I loved her, and there will be joy." I present to you your queen, Queen Buttercup.
Hold it. She doesn't marry Humperdinck. She marries Wesley. After all that Wesley did for her, if she didn't marry him, it wouldn't be fair. And spoilers for the following Scooby-Doo episodes. The gang are enjoying a rock concert performed by a band led by an old friend of theirs, when the performance is interrupted by a voodoo witch doctor angry about one of the group's songs.
I think our old pal Alex Super really made it as a rock star.
And what a doll. I mean, to invite us as his special guests.
Especially when our concert tickets would have cost us $10 each.
Okay, $10 may sound cheap for tickets, but this was in 1976, and when accounting for inflation, that concert would have cost over $250 in today's money for the five of them together. The last concert I went to was Paul McCartney in 2019, and I have no idea what it cost because my incredible sister took me and paid for the tickets. According to Google, the average concert costs now around $250. Per ticket. Jesus. When are Fred and the rest going to unmask Ticketmaster? Also, I should call my sister and thank her again. Roger, no last name given, was the manager of the Alex Super Experience, a rock band quartet with only 2 instruments between them, unless you count clapping as one. The group had written a new song that was expected to be a massive hit worth millions, and their greedy manager decided to steal the rights to it for himself. Roger was helped by Lila, the group's sole female member, and an unnamed henchman dressed as a zombie. Oh, hey, he looks familiar. Incidentally, the name of the band, the Alex Super Experience, comes from a retcon years later in a direct-to-video release, and the group's name was never provided here. But since I like that name, I'm going to refer to them as such in my analysis.
You must suffer the curse of Mamba Wamba.
As the song was based on an ancient voodoo chant, Roger and Lila staged her kidnapping at the hands of the chant's subject, the ghost of a witch doctor called Mamba Wamba. Lila pretended to have been zombified by the witch doctor, who threatened her bandmates with the same unless they signed a parchment promising never to play the chant again. The parchment was in fact a disguised contract assigning all the rights to the soon-to-be hit song to Roger and Lila. Right off the bat, we're told the Mamba Wamba song is going to be worth millions, so clearly the villain's scheme would be profitable. And while musicians have appeared in the Scooby-Doo universe several times before, this is the first time that a plot revolved around their music, so it was original as well. What hurts the design, though, is a failure to understand just how the music industry actually works. This is emblematic of the naivete often exhibited by the Scooby writers when coming up with many of their stories, an almost childlike understanding of the world. They were writing for children, so it's not like they were doing anything wrong, but that doesn't mean they couldn't have spent a bit more time hashing out their scripts. We've seen villain schemes that involve handling radioactive materials without safety precautions, or stealing large amounts of gold without appreciating how difficult it would be to manage the sheer amount of weight involved. We've seen land swindles that would be difficult to pass even a cursory examination by real estate professionals, or jewel thefts that don't account for the trouble the bad guy would have fencing the stolen items. The idea that the rights to a hit song could be so easily stolen by a greedy manager and bandmate using the plan we see in the episode fails for 2 reasons. First, most, if not all, U.S. states have laws making contracts unenforceable if signed under duress. If, for example, someone held a gun to your head and forced you to sell them your house, the sales contract wouldn't hold any legal weight. Granted, this could be a difficult thing to prove in court, But in a situation like what we see in this episode, it wouldn't be too difficult to prove to a judge or jury that 3 of the 4 bandmates signed over their rights under fraudulent circumstances. The fact that they had 4 witnesses to the act would likely go a long way toward determining the contract was null and void. Second, it's highly unlikely that Roger would have even needed to steal the song in the first place. The music industry is notoriously predatory, and I'm not just talking about Ted Nugent's love life. Young musicians seldom, if ever, are treated fairly by their managers and record label. A songwriter who wrote a hit single prior to representation by a manager or label would, by default, be the rights holder. However, they would likely be required to sign those rights away before anyone would agree to produce or market them. They would also likely be required to agree that all their future songs would be the property of their management while they remained under contract. As the Alex Super Experience had a manager and record label at this point in their career, they shouldn't have had the rights to their songs in the first place. It usually takes a musician years in the industry to build up enough personal clout to be able to retain the rights to their music. Admittedly, all this conjecture is moot because, as seen in the episode, the band did somehow have the rights to the Mamba Wamba song, and whatever contract Roger had with the band didn't screw them over enough, and he was determined to get a big payday. This was extremely short-sighted. After all, Roger could have made $1 million by stealing the song, but by remaining with the band, he had the potential to earn much more than that over the years as their success grew. He could have also leveraged his position to manage other groups under more favorable terms, possibly even creating his own record label. The thing is, the entertainment industry is extremely short-sighted, especially when it comes to music. Most producers look no further than what an up-and-coming talent can generate right then and there, taking advantage of whatever fad happens to be in fashion at the time. They constantly drop new artists after their initial surge of popularity wanes, rather than try to cultivate them for future income. Thus, Roger's short-sighted greed is simply par for the course for the business. Let's imagine what would have happened had Roger succeeded and the rights were signed over to him and Lila. For starters, whatever money they make from the song wouldn't be immediate. This isn't like stealing an expensive necklace and fencing it. It takes time for the profits of a hit song to be seen via record sales. And what would the rest of the Alex Super Experience be doing all that time? As far as they knew, their bandmate was irreversibly turned into a zombie, and they signed a magical covenant that their song would never be played again. What would be their reaction the first time they heard the Mamba Wamba chant on the radio? Or they went to an LA restaurant and saw Roger and Lila laughing at another table while sipping champagne? Alex, Ray, and Deke would probably make a phone call to their bank, check the balance in their accounts, and immediately lawyer up. From there, any money received from the single would likely remain in trust until the rights issue works its way through the legal system. It would then be up to the remaining bandmates to decide if they want to continue the fight or just settle out of court and get on with their lives. While they would have an excellent case for proving fraud and possibly even referral to criminal court, they would also just as likely agree to a cash settlement rather than admit they were tricked by a guy dressed like a member of the Village People. I keep focusing on Roger even though Lila was also part of the scheme, but I think it's more than likely she was taken advantage of by the older man and would eventually be cheated by him as well. I'm not saying she should be forgiven or is any less culpable. I just feel she has as little to do with the plot as the unnamed henchman they hired as the muscle. Just because Roger made a mistake by not originally signing the band to a more exploitative contract doesn't factor into his evaluation. He gets high marks for originality and profitability, but these are offset by how easy it would be for him to get caught and his victims to be reimbursed. 2.5 out of 5 for the design. This is the third time a witch doctor appeared in the franchise, and the second time Voodoo was involved with the villain. In fact, the first time Voodoo appeared in Scooby-Doo, a zombie was also one of the bad guys. A zombie with the exact same character model, just with a different color scheme. Speaking of the zombie, it's uncanny how much the designers made him look like famous horror actor Michael Berryman. It's common for the Scooby-Doo producers to borrow character names and designs from pop culture, and it might be tempting to believe that they saw Berryman in a film and were inspired to create a zombie that looked like the actor. Except this zombie design first appeared in 1969's Which Witch is Which, while Berryman's first credited movie role wasn't until 6 years later. By the way, he also makes a brief cameo as a zombie head in Curse of the Lake Monster. We're also dealing once again with heavy cultural appropriation by a white villain, and while at least it didn't include brownface, fortunately because the producers didn't use their original design for Mamba Wamba, it's made all the more poignant this time around considering rock music played a significant role in the episode.
And now for our next number, an original based on an ancient voodoo chant, Mamba Wamba. Mamba, Wamba, Unga Mamba, Unga Wamba.
The early history of rock and roll was essentially one of white musicians co-opting the music of black musicians. Despite rock music itself being rooted in traditional black rhythm and blues, racism prevented many talented black artists from being initially recognized for their work. The Alex Super Experience song at the heart of the scheme literally, and I mean that in the literal sense of that word, directly reused a chant from a religion that was created by black people. Ironically, the villain's scheme involved a white band being ripped off, if not by black people, at least by white bad guys utilizing black imagery. I don't know whether to classify this as piercingly tone-deaf and ignorant, or a brilliant moment of turning the cultural tables. None of the disguises here featured any special effects other than how Mamba Wamba would appear in a burst of smoke. He also used smoke to cover up his abduction of the treacherous Lila, though at no point does anyone say how this effect was achieved. Not explaining exactly how a villain faked their supernatural powers seemed to have become a hallmark of later Scooby episodes early in the franchise. Perhaps the writers felt by then the audience had seen enough of the show to understand smoke was always created by smoke bombs and transparency or walking through walls was always the result of a film projector. Speaking of magically appearing and walking through walls...
Zoinks! It's Mamba Wamba! Mamba Wamba! Like he's here! Look!
Could that mean that...
Oh no! He's not gonna get me!
Oh, you have volunteered to become my victims.
Wait a minute. If Roger was with the gang all this time, how did Mamba Wamba appear just then? It can't be a projection because he threw a physical voodoo doll down to the boys. And it can't be the henchman dressed up as the witch doctor because not only do we hear Roger's voice, but the henchman is too bulky for that disguise. The usual hidden film projector would explain walking through walls, but not the villain's appearance at the top of the stairs.
Mamba Wamba's footprints.
He disappeared right through that wall.
Which means there's a secret passageway.
Fred, are you all right?
Yeah, guess I don't know my own strength.
This may have been an attempt by the writers to explain how Mamba Wamba did the wall trick. However, as we see, Fred had to smash through the old brickwork. This wasn't really a secret passage as there was no doorway, hidden or otherwise, to pass through. Those footprints halfway through the wall should not have been possible. The only explanation is that Roger purposely arranged them like that to make it appear as though his witch doctor was a ghost who could pass through solid objects. Except ghosts shouldn't be able to leave footprints in the first place. Regardless, I suppose this could count as a special effect. The Mamba Wamba disguise wasn't particularly frightening unless you happened to grow up in a culture where the outfit had some religious or societal significance. It's like how someone seeing a devil disguise may find it more scary if they grew up Catholic. Or how a priest outfit is more scary if you grew up Catholic. All Roger's outfit had going for it was the angry white face of the mask. Speaking of which, this was apparently a mask and not makeup, as seen by Fred pulling it off at the end. However, it was surprisingly articulated for a rubber mask, considering how it was able to exhibit facial expressions throughout the episode.
Are you back there, Scooby?
Yeah. You back here, son?
No, I'm up here.
No? Somebody's back here.
Sure. Your imagination.
Goddamn gaslighting again. You can't even use the excuse that nobody knows there's a monster yet, considering Shaggy and Scooby already ran into both before this.
Like I'll prove it. See? Not a zombie in sight.
Do neither Shaggy nor Scooby have any peripheral vision at all? To miss seeing the zombie like this would indicate severe pathological tunnel vision, which, incidentally, could be a side effect of either hallucinogenic drug use or even diabetes. And let's be honest, either wouldn't be that much of a surprise for those two. Frankly, the henchman's zombie disguise was the most frightening outfit worn by any of the villains, though as mentioned, it's literally nothing we haven't already seen before. Technically, Lila also dressed up as a zombie version of herself, but that was nothing more than gray makeup, eyeliner, and a blank expression. So unless you find disaffected goth girls more frightening than sexy, her disguise is barely worthy of consideration. The disguises weren't original or scary, except for possibly the zombie henchman, which was a lazily reused character model. And though featuring special effects, they weren't that impressive. 2 out of 5 for the outfit score. The very first thing Mamba Wamba does is kidnap Lila on stage in front of hundreds of people. Unsurprisingly, it's never said how she faked her disappearance, but as this takes place on a stage, I'm willing to ignore the lack of explanation and assume she went through a trapdoor under cover of a smoke bomb. This was immediately a police matter, and it's only the weird quirk of the Scooby-Doo-niverse where all crimes witnessed by the gang go unreported until they personally solve the mystery and catch the villain. I'd like to think that should the victim not be found, the police would eventually be contacted. It's just a pity that by then, the crime scene would be hopelessly contaminated by fingerprints, dog hair, and empty boxes of Scooby snacks. It's strange that no one in the audience reported the crime, though it's likely they may have just assumed it was part of the act. However, the performance abruptly ended at that point, and as we didn't see an angry mob demanding a refund for their tickets after realizing they only saw half a show, the kidnapping was probably considered legitimate by those watching. Which makes the lack of police involvement until the very end that much more baffling. Even without anyone contacting local law enforcement, word of the abduction would have quickly reached the ears of local journalists who would no doubt have either gone to the theater in person or contacted the police department for an update. 1 or 2 calls from the press would have immediately raised the suspicions of the local precinct, who would have sent at least 1 officer to investigate.
A voodoo doll of Lila.
A voodoo doll?
It means that the voodoo priest plans to make Lila a zombie.
That's not how a voodoo doll is traditionally used. Okay, to be fair, voodoo dolls in pop culture are usually not accurate to actual African or Caribbean tradition. But even in the Scooby-Doo-niverse, a voodoo doll is something that the bad guy uses to hurt or control their victims, not as a precursor to zombification.
It's a note she found in her dressing room.
Do not play the sacred chant or ever return to Maison Dupré.
Maison Dupré? What's that?
The name of the old plantation near here, where Lila grew up. That's where I first heard the voodoo chant.
Leaving a handwritten note just means there's more evidence against you should you get caught. Depending upon who wrote the note, it could also be a dead giveaway if the handwriting is recognized by the victims. Roger and Lila did have a henchman working for them, so it's possible he wrote it so as not to tip off the rest of the band. It's also possible that the note was Plan A, left in the hopes that the Alex Super Experience would avoid playing the cursed chant and go to Lila's family home, where Roger could trick them into signing the contract. Staging Lila's kidnapping would then have been Plan B once the bad guys realized Alex and the rest were determined to play the song in concert.
There it is!
A real southern plantation. I hope they raise something here besides the dead.
I've got some bad news for you about southern plantations in the Scooby-Doo-niverse, Velma. Then again, zombies are probably the least evil thing plantations are notorious for.
A zombie?
One of Mamba Wamba's sleighs, no doubt.
Come on, Daphne. Pay attention to your surroundings and choose your words more carefully.
Doesn't look like anybody's been here for years. You two can plug in their amplifiers.
Okay.
Yikes!
If the plantation house had been deserted for years, why does it have electricity?
Great going, guys. You blew the circuit.
Hey, come on, Velma. They were just doing what Fred told them to do. If you want to blame someone, blame him.
Try the next room and be careful.
Sure, Fred, I'm sorry.
What the hell, Fred? All they did was plug in the amps because you told them to. Don't blame Shaggy and Scooby for cheap wiring. How are they supposed to carefully plug them into a wall socket? Sing it a lullaby first?
Thanks, Scoop. Like for once you didn't drop anything.
Fred's kind of a dick, but even Shaggy's guilty of negging people as well. The location Roger and Lila chose to terrorize Alex and the rest was also a mistake, as it directly linked Lila to the scheme. What with it being her childhood home. Then again, it was also where Alex had first heard the voodoo chant that inspired his song, so it probably made sense that the witch doctor would have wanted the band to return there, as it was his domain. Wait a minute. The plantation was isolated and clearly deserted for years. How exactly did Alex hear the chant? Who was singing it? Was it the ghosts of the former slaves who once toiled there? Quick tangent. The location for the story is not provided, but the fact that it contains a plantation that appears to be surrounded by a bayou, and they make a batch of crawdad gumbo at the end, this episode is likely set in Louisiana. In addition, the plantation is referred to as Maison Dupré, or the House of Dupré. I'd be remiss in not at least mentioning that Zombie Island was set in a Louisiana bayou plantation, and one of the characters had the last name Dupré. I'd like to think the writers of that film added it as a nod to the Mamba Wamba episode, but as they weren't really doing callbacks at that stage of the Scooby franchise, it's likely Dupré was chosen in both instances simply for being a common Louisiana surname. Lila isn't the only one who fakes her abduction.
He's not gonna get me!
Roger, come back!
We've got to stop him before it's too late.
Jeepers! That's Roger's hat!
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
This is followed by real abductions.
Maybe I can fake our way out of here. Back off, Buster! My hands are dangerous! Hi! Hee! Hi! Hi! Alex? Oh, no!
This must feel weird for Daphne to not be the one kidnapped for a change.
Mamba Wamba got Alex!
Poor Alex. Who'll be next?
Mamba Wamba already got Lila, Roger, and Alex, leaving just Ray and Deke. Gosh, who will be next, Velma?
Hey, where are the other musicians? Ray and Deke.
Look! Uh-oh. Ray and Deke dolls.
They've become zombies.
Eh? Kidnapping doesn't count as a blunder on the part of the villains in this episode because it's an integral and necessary part of the plan. It's not like Roger and Lila are going to keep the band confined afterward. Although, making them disappear might have been smarter for the bad guys. Not to get too dark, but Alex, Ray, and Deke are helplessly bound, and they're surrounded by a swamp probably swarming with alligators that would certainly help get rid of any evidence. It's not like Louisiana bayous have nothing but frogs. See what I mean about possible drug-induced tunnel vision? The bad guys' plan would have had a much better chance of success if they had not only got rid of the 3 people who shared the rights to the $1 Million song, but also the 5 witnesses who followed them to the plantation. If Roger and Lila were the only survivors, they could make up any number of stories as to her bandmate's disappearance. In fact, as the sole remaining living member of the band, all the rights to the Mamba Wamba chant would belong to Lila, meaning they wouldn't have even needed Alex, Ray, or Deke's signatures.
Relax, cool it. Nobody in here but us witch doctors.
It is time for the witch doctors to walk the bed of hot coals.
Hot coals?
The Scooby writers are mixing up their religious traditions again. Firewalking is practiced all over the world in different cultures, but it's not really a tenet of traditional voodoo.
Oh boy, they sure don't make coal walking shoes the way they used to. We'll see you later.
This whole escapade makes no sense. Roger knew he was not really the ghost of Mamba Wamba, so what possessed him to humor Shaggy and Scooby's shenanigans here? Did he just want to torture them by having them burn their feet? Or at least Scooby's feet, since Shaggy was wearing shoes? And before anyone mentions it in the comments, yes, I know that walking on hot coals is often actually safe, even when barefoot, provided you take quick, deliberate steps and don't spend too long on top of them. The likely reason the stilts burned was because they were sunk deep down into the hotter coals below, which is why if you are ever crazy enough to try firewalking, you need to be careful not to run or do anything else that might kick up hot ash that would stick to your feet. In many ways, it's not too dissimilar to walking on hot sand at the beach. By the way, I am not advocating or giving advice for walking on hot coals. If you do that, you're on your own. I'm on the record saying it's a bad idea.
You are imposters!
Somebody do something! What do you know? I found the frog!
Nice going, guys. Now we can get out of here.
Don't let them escape!
Just how long were Mamba Wamba and his cohorts trapped in that collapsed hut for Shaggy to have had time to untie everyone? Instead of making Shaggy and Scooby walk on hot coals, Roger should have just had his henchmen grab them. Failing to do this just led to the two escaping with the incriminating document, as well as releasing the kidnapped band members and ultimately ending with the villain's capture. This was the episode's critical bad guy mistake.
Sorry, we goofed. But look, we got Mamba anyway.
Shag, Scooby.
Like who'd you expect, Mamba Wamba?
Never mind.
As far as Fred knew, he had just captured Mamba Wamba in that carpet. So why would he have released the villain like that? Shouldn't he have kept them a prisoner until the police could be summoned? It's not like they're playing a game of tag where the bad guys must surrender peacefully if caught.
Yoo! Here we are, Mamba!
Did a Fred trap finally catch the villains without a hitch?
What is this, a masquerade party?
Something like that, Sheriff. But now it's time for the unmasking.
Roger, Lila, and their henchmen are not tied up and could have escaped at any time. Maybe Scooby villains do work by tag rules where the bad guys must surrender peacefully if caught. On the plus side, Roger and Lila did successfully lure the band to the plantation, stage their own kidnappings, as well as the legitimate abductions of Alex, Ray, and Deke. They were also able to get at least Alex to sign away his share of the Mamba Wamba chance profits. On the negative side, they lacked the grim resolve to do what was necessary to protect their scheme by disposing of the rest of the band and any witnesses. Roger's sudden whim to see Shaggy and Scooby burn themselves also proved fatal to their freedom, and they inexplicably waited around calmly until the sheriff arrived to arrest them. I'm giving Roger and Lila an operation score of 2.5 out of 5. Their successes were reasonably balanced out by their failures. This leaves Mamba Wamba and his zombie sidekicks with a final due score of 2.3 out of 5. Generally speaking, the animation in the Scooby-Doo show exhibited significant improvement over the new Scooby-Doo movies. Generally speaking. I would like to take a moment to thank my new Patreon members and apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. Adrian Johansson. Thank you, Adrian Johansson. Darian Van Hook. Thank you, Darian Van Hook. Richard Smith. Thank you, Richard Smith. Lexi. Thank you, Lexi. Joseph Lucino. Thank you, Joseph Lucino. Good name, by the way. Thank you to everyone helping support my channel. It absolutely means the world to me. If you'd like to help, there's a link to my Patreon page below, but please only join if you're comfortable doing so. New members get a personal thank you in the next regular video I upload after they join, as well as credits in each regular video for as long as they remain a member. While visiting Seattle, the gang read a newspaper article about a local building site being haunted by a demon. They meet with the construction company's owner and learn his crew had accidentally opened a literal portal to hell. The man also happened to be in possession of an old amulet which, according to legend, was used to originally trap the demons 100 years earlier. And now it seems they want it for themselves.
Nom, nom, nom.
Lobsters don't turn red until after they're cooked. Having just survived being submerged in a vat of boiling water, it's no wonder it came out looking for a fight. Sam Crenshaw was the owner of the Crenshaw Construction Company. He used the legend of demons having once terrorized 19th century Seattle as cover for his crimes by dressing up as one of the supernatural beasts to frighten away his employees and trash his own offices. Crenshaw had a secondary disguise, crusty sailor Albert Tross, with which he had planned to make his getaway. According to the story Crenshaw recounted to the gang, the demons had originally appeared over a century earlier and ran amok until being driven back by a mysterious stranger using black magic from a mystical amulet. The crack in the ground from which the demons had emerged was then sealed by the town. Shortly afterward, much of Seattle was leveled by a massive fire. During Reconstruction, the streets were razed and many old buildings were buried underground with the modern city being constructed above. This created the famous Seattle Underground, where much of this episode takes place.
When the old city burned down around 1890, they built new Seattle on top of it.
There really was a fire that destroyed a large portion of Seattle in 1889, and the city does have an underground section created for when the streets were elevated during the rebuilding.
Jinkies, it's so quiet.
However, the Seattle Underground is nothing like this. In real life, it's more just a series of connected basements or storefronts built before they raised the street level in the city. Also, this is underground, and the gang aren't carrying flashlights. How can it be so bright down there when there are no obvious sources of light? The Seattle fire was in 1889, and the underground city was buried soon afterward. Ice cream cones didn't start to become popular for over another decade. How likely would it have been for that business to have had signs advertising them?
Shaggy, Scooby, wait!
Zoinks!
Oh hey, they look familiar.
They're only stone figures, statues.
Velma punched those stone statues hard enough to make thumping sounds. Wouldn't that hurt like hell? After repeated viewings of this episode, and unless my copy is missing some key scenes, I can't help but notice that the villain didn't really commit much of a crime. Or at least whatever crimes he did commit were either implied or not that well described.
Wow! Look at that!
Mr. Crenshaw, the paper said you were the first to cite these creatures.
That's right. And now they've broken into my offices and taken everything, including the company funds.
The episode opened with a single demon attacking the construction site, scaring a couple of workers and damaging a steel beam. We later see Crenshaw's office having been allegedly destroyed by the demons, who made off with the company funds.
But what would demons want with money?
Well, Velma, that's probably your first clue that the demons aren't real.
Let's look in here.
What the hell? Why did it get brighter in the room after Shaggy opened the door? Where is all this light coming from? And again, while Seattle does have an underground, it is nothing like this. all the leftover merchandise makes it seem as though the city suffered a major cataclysm and was abandoned. In real life, however, raising the grade of the street took years to complete. Property owners had plenty of time to take their possessions with them.
It was nothing. Uh-oh. Get away from there. Get your paws off my sea chest.
Money?
Whatever Crenshaw spent on that lock should have been used for buying a chest that wasn't made of what was apparently balsa wood. The Scooby fansite states the villain had been stealing treasures from the underground city, but that's not shown in the episode. The only explicit mention of anything valuable that was stolen was the company funds from the Crenshaw Construction Company. And whatever was in that chest, despite looking like possible gold coins in Scooby's paws, is only ever referred to as money. As there was no mention of any lost or hidden treasure in the underground city, what Scooby found in the chest had to have been the missing funds stolen from the Crenshaw Company earlier in the episode. Except why did it appear to be in the form of loose change and not dollar bills? In a previous video, I explained that at the time this episode aired, it wasn't unreasonable for a business to have a lot of cash on hand to pay expenses. But even then, they weren't paying employees in quarters. Wait a minute. A businessman steals from his own company by dressing up as a red supernatural entity, and one of his disguises included a sailor with a beard. Why does that sound familiar? Embezzlement is a crime we've seen before in the Scooby-Doo universe, but there had almost always been a reason for it, usually due to the villain's company having financial trouble. This doesn't appear to be the case here, as Crenshaw was plainly still finding construction work. Obviously, just because a company seems to be doing well on the surface doesn't mean it can't be having difficulties, but most Scooby-Doo episodes at least offer a better explanation for the bad guy's motive.
Hey, I found something.
It might be a clue. A hotel matchbook from the Crow's Nest.
Oh, that's an old waterfront dive near here.
Why was this a clue? They were in a ransacked office with smashed furniture, broken glass, and papers strewn everywhere. But a matchbook is what drew Daphne's attention? So one of the office workers was a smoker and drinks at the bar in a nearby hotel. End of mystery. There was a potential partner in Crenshaw's scheme. Sally, who ran the front desk at the Crow's Nest Hotel. Despite not being shown arrested at the end, there were several suspicious things that possibly incriminated her.
That old salt snow demon, that's my star boarder, Albert Tross.
At your service, mateys.
For starters, she introduced Crenshaw in his Albert Tross disguise as her star boarder, implying that he was either a long-term or frequent guest of the hotel. This made little sense, as the demons were only allegedly released a few days ago, according to Crenshaw. Unless he had been dressing up as Albert Tross to stay at Sally's hotel for weeks or months beforehand to establish himself as her star boarder, it's very suspicious for her to have described him as such.
It's the demons!
What happened?
Blast those scurvy monsters, they've taken poor Albert.
Second, after Shaggy and Scooby first encountered the demon, Sally appeared in a panic to tell the group that Crenshaw, in his Albert Tross disguise, had just been taken. If Sally was innocent, this means Crenshaw had to have had an accomplice dressed up as a demon for her to have seen this happen. Since at the end it appeared as though Crenshaw had been working alone, this means Sally had to have been lying about his abduction.
The demon's tracks end here, at this panel.
Well, look at this.
Captain Sally's basement.
Third, while chasing the demon, the gang found a secret passage used by the villain led directly from the underground city to the basement of the Crow's Nest Hotel, further implicating anyone associated with the place.
This must be some kind of museum.
And this has got to be the Hall of Horrors.
Oh hey, she looks familiar. Finally, there's this.
I'm all for stopping right now.
Crenshaw and Sally share what can only be described as an evil, knowing smile, making her appear guilty as hell. If she wasn't part of the villain's scheme, what was this moment about? It's difficult not to conclude that Sally was Crenshaw's partner, especially when you consider how often in the episode the demons are referred to in the plural, meaning more than one. I can't help but think she had been one of the villains in an earlier draft of the script, but her part was reduced and the writers forgot to get rid of the smile moment. This is not the only example of poor writing or baffling moments in the episode. What the hell was this? This is insane, right? The demons weren't shadow monsters. This scene had nothing to do with the mystery. This was just a ridiculous physics-breaking filler moment. Despite what the Scooby fan site says, and setting aside miscellaneous misconduct like intimidation and kidnapping, the only crime mentioned is embezzlement, which has happened several times by now in the franchise. Crenshaw stole his company's operational funds, which could not have been much more than 1 or 2 months' worth of cash needed to pay bills or cover payroll. So not only was his scheme not original, it could not have been that profitable either. It could not have been worth it for Crenshaw to deal with the hassle of the demon disguise as well as the false sailor identity to make his escape. And the only interesting part of the plot was the cover story. He gets a 1.5 out of 5 for his design. Crenshaw does much better when it comes to his outfit. While most Scooby-Doo monsters are based on the supernatural, this is the first time we see demons from hell appear in the franchise. And while no mention is ever made of any religion, it's clear from the setting and traditional design of the monsters that we're dealing with Christianity. This would be the first time a predominantly white American religion is the basis for a white villain's costume. Yes, Christianity is not exclusively white, but it is the majority religion for white people here in the United States.
It's the Steamin' Demon!
The costume also included special effects by way of the smoke that accompanied the demon, as well as the somewhat underwhelming hissing sound whenever the monster made an appearance. I say underwhelming because instead of the infernal growls of a tortured soul, it sounded more like Frank Welker was getting over a cold and trying to clear his throat.
Do you realize that you've been holding up the scene, huh? Wait till I say, roll 'em. Okay, now hiss and roar.
Okay, setting aside where Shaggy got his Hollywood director's outfit, where in the hell did those studio lights and motion picture cameras come from?
This drugstore still has a shelf full of old medicines. Castor oil, cod liver oil.
Opium, cocaine, heroin, morphine. What? Those are all being legally sold at the time the drugstore was buried.
And all the smoke and sizzling handprints were created with those chemicals we found in the old pharmacy.
Another repeated special effect throughout was how the demons would leave burning handprints during their attacks. Though woefully inadequate, Velma does at least offer an explanation for how Crenshaw managed this. From her explanation, we can infer the gloves of the demon disguise were coated in an extremely caustic chemical that burned everything it touched. However...
Zoink! A stone statue coming to life? Oh? Hiding in the shadows? Waiting to grab us when we least expect?
Shouldn't Daphne be screaming in agony as her arms and the top half of her torso suffer third-degree chemical burns? Technically speaking, she should have ended up looking like Rhonda from Killer Workout. This was the same problem had by the 10,000-volt ghost, where the villain's disguise is not consistent when it comes to the harm it caused the environment, as we see the demon touching other things in the episode without damaging them.
Where's Daphne?
Look! Steamin' Demon's footprints! Like he must have grabbed Daphne!
Quick, let's split up and find her!
Wait a minute. Why are you splitting up? There's a set of fresh, smoking footprints right there. Just follow them to Daphne. Is Fred on the spectrum and splitting up is his tick? The costume design itself is decent, despite not looking too dissimilar to the gargoyle seen in an earlier series. While the face isn't particularly scary, and the horns and wings are what you'd expect to find on a generic demon design, pay special attention to the feet. Instead of shoes or boots that end in a claw, or flippers as the aforementioned gargoyles seem to have, Crenshaw's demon disguise featured fully separated talons. These could not have been comfortable to wear, as it meant his feet had to be tilted at an uncomfortable degree inside the suit's ankles. Like how a chronically insecure short person wears special boots to try and make themselves look taller. Those feet elevate what would have ordinarily been considered a generic monster disguise, and that, coupled with the special effects and uniqueness of the costume, earns Crenshaw a 4 out of 5 for his outfit. Possibly the biggest mistake made by Crenshaw is everything he did. For starters, let's take a moment to think about how he went about what should have been just a simple embezzlement scheme. In most cases, when stealing from a company, even if you're the owner, you generally try not to draw attention to yourself. The most profitable embezzlement often takes place over years by simply taking a little at a time. And if you can make it look like normal business, you could get away with it indefinitely. For example, as a teenager working at a really lousy bakery, the owner's wife at the time handled the accounting, and she managed to embezzle over $10,000 a year by instructing the more trusted employees to set aside a tiny amount of cash while making the daily deposit and placing it in an envelope in her desk. We're talking a mere $20 on slow weekdays and $40 on the busier Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. This may not sound like a lot, but when accounting for inflation, in today's money, we're talking about close to $30,000 per year in tax-free income. She even trusted us so little when it came to stealing for her that we were required to write the date and our initials when placing the money in her envelope, which I think she referred to as her grocery money. Before you ask if she had still been accounting for the money a different way in the books, we were told to subtract what we took from the register tape before logging it into the daily receipts journal. And when the outside of the envelope was filled with dates and initials, she'd simply throw it away and put a new one in the drawer. I don't know how long she had been doing this before I worked there, nor how long it went on after I left. But my point is, she was able to steal so much so easily by making it look like a natural part of doing business. Being just a dumb kid at the time, I knew it wasn't right, but it took years for me to realize just how messed up it was. Instead of stealing from his company in a similarly subtle manner, Crenshaw did exactly the opposite by attacking his workers while dressed in a full-body demon suit and destroying his offices, the latter of which really showed his lack of commitment. Demons or not, the missing company funds were a matter for the police and should have resulted in an investigation. If nothing else, his insurance company would certainly be asking a lot of questions.
Like now you're talking. I'm always looking for a way out.
Hatches like that only open from the side with the wheel. Even supposing it was possible to open it from the other side like that, if this was the original seal installed by 19th century Seattle to imprison the demons, why would they have installed a hatch that could be opened from both sides? In fact, if the story told by Crenshaw was true, why would they have even made the seal able to be opened in the first place? If the point was to close the doorway to hell so the demons could never escape again, using a latch with a wheel would be asking for trouble later on. There's a reason Montresor used stone and mortar and not cardboard and Elmer's glue, and not just because the latter weren't available at the time. If Crenshaw had been planning to go on the run using a false identity, why didn't he just burn the building to the ground? By the time the arson investigators determined Crenshaw's bones weren't mixed with the ashes in the building, he'd have been far away, living the good life as a sailor named Albert Tross. Albert Tross. Get it? The Scooby writers yet again used a pun when naming a new character, though I am slightly confused by the name they went with. Why Tross instead of Ross, considering Ross is a much more familiar surname? This is often why it takes me a while to write the scripts for these villain rankings. After seeing the writers had made a joke by giving a sailor character a name that sounded like albatross, a bird almost as famous for being associated with the ocean as a seagull, it got me thinking about the last name Tross. Was this just a made-up surname by the Scooby writers, or an actual, real last name that I wasn't familiar with? I had to find out. And sure enough, Tross is a legitimate surname of Germanic origins, and it was likely derived from a word that means someone who works by transporting goods by wagon or cart. This made me wonder if perhaps the writers chose that name specifically because of the double meaning, considering a sailor is someone whose job sometimes entails shipping goods. I don't usually give early Scooby writers that much credit, though, which made me wonder if perhaps they went with Tross instead of Ross because there might have been a famous Albert Ross and they didn't want to get sued. A quick online search found the most famous Albert Ross was an English soccer player from the 1930s. Yes, Dan, I'm calling it soccer, not football, because that's what we call it here in America. But then, while looking up these names, I saw a reference to a character in Douglas Adams' Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, which happens to be my favorite novel written by my favorite author. But I didn't recognize the name. I opened up my ebook copy to do a text search for Albert Ross, but came up empty. However, one of the secondary characters was named A.K. Ross, and that's how he's referred to in the entire book, except for one single instance when someone refers to him as Al Ross. There are several first names that use Al as the diminutive, but this does mean his name could have been Albert Ross. For those who haven't read Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, Adams used the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, as the basis for the novel, as well as a plot point involving the major conflict in the story. For those unfamiliar with the poem, an albatross plays a key role in it. Thus, it's likely that Douglas Adams did make Albert Ross his character's name, but didn't specifically draw attention to it so as to make an extremely subtle pun that would likely be lost on almost every one of his readers the first time around. It took me nearly 4 decades to understand a joke by my favorite author in my favorite book of his because of this minor rabbit hole I went down trying to determine why the writers of a cartoon from my childhood picked the less obvious surname for the pun they used to name a character. This added over an hour to writing my script for the video you're watching now, not to mention all the time it will take to film and edit, as well as to look for appropriate images to display behind me as I discuss it. This kind of thing is typical when I sit down to write my scripts and should go a long way toward explaining why I'm only able to push out 2 or 3 videos in a month. Crenshaw's other mistakes include not 1, but 2 kidnappings, and unlike Roger and Lila from the last episode, there was no reason for him to have abducted either Daphne or his sailor alter ego.
He was going to use the Albert Tross disguise for his getaway.
But we found the matchbook that connected him to the old sailor.
So he was forced to make Tross vanish too.
Why did Crenshaw panic when the gang found that matchbook, something once commonly used as a promotional item? It stands to reason that his company would have had any number of matchbooks on hand from neighboring businesses that gave them out. Worse, the gang were only made more determined to check the underground city after Tross was kidnapped by the demons. It's possible they may have gone down there anyway, but if Crenshaw's goal was to frighten them off by staging his own abduction, bad move, buddy. Oh hey, he looks oh, no, actually, the Rambling Ghost doesn't show up for another 4 episodes.
Daphne! What are you doing in there?
That creepy demon stuffed me into this piano.
And of course, taking Daphne was the typical Scooby villain mistake because, again, it just gave the gang more of a reason to stick around or even contact the authorities. Also, Crenshaw stuffed Daphne into a piano. In addition to her not having any injuries from the costume,
Look, is this what you wanted to see?
Shouldn't that piano have been covered in burning demon handprints? The lack of injuries on Daphne also demonstrates another flaw in Crenshaw's operation: his determination. Specifically, he didn't seem to have any. That suit could have made for an excellent snooper deterrent over and above just scaring people away by chasing them. No matter how much they enjoyed a good mystery, seeing one of their friends horribly burned by the monster might go a long way toward convincing the rest of the gang to leave things up to the police for a change. Or not. Incidentally, the inclusion of the demon sealing amulet seemed pointless. It came up just a few times in the episode and served no real purpose other than to establish a weak incentive for the demons to attack Crenshaw's company. Then again, at least they didn't go with the distant ancestor anger at a spirit so now it's attacking their descendants trope this time around. Crenshaw does deserve some credit for being able to hide the actual number of demons involved in the scheme. While the flashback to Old Seattle showed 3 of them escaping hell, as well as 2 of them attacking the construction site, those were both just Crenshaw's accounts, which he had probably just made up. He did manage to animate 3 of them by using the underground cable car tracks, though.
Look! Those switches must have run the cable car system in the old city.
The actual Seattle Underground does not contain a cable car system. The city would have included the rail lines when they raised the streets after the fire.
1, 2, 3, jump!
They jumped from the back of the cable car, opposite to the way it was traveling. Yet instead of going with the established momentum, Shaggy and Scooby flew way in the opposite direction with enough force to ricochet off an awning to land back on the cable car. Cartoon physics. Wait, what the hell is happening here? Are they underground or not? Because there are trees and grass and what looks like faraway hills or mountains and a sky. And the cable car they're on goes down a massive hill. There's no way the city could have built a new street level that high up. Yeah, either the bar the rope was tied to or the fire hydrant should have been ripped off before the cable car would have split in half. Cartoon physics is starting to irritate me more than Carl the Stuntman. Carl the Stuntman. There's also Sally saying monsters, and they took poor Albert, implying there had been more than one demon, though I've already gone over my own feelings that Sally was an accomplice who escaped capture. This ability to hide the fact he had been allegedly working alone is the only plus in an operation that contained almost nothing but minuses. 1.5 out of 5.
And now we'll see who Albert Tross really is.
Sam Crenshaw.
Yeah, alias Albert Tross and the Demon.
You're not tied up, Crenshaw. Just get up and run. The Scooby-Dooverse really does run by tag rules. And how did Fred know Albert Tross was another disguise? It wasn't like they found any makeup kits or a fake beard. There had been nothing to indicate that Crenshaw and Tross were the same person. Sam Crenshaw and his demon-themed embezzlement plot is awarded a due score of 2.3 out of 5.
Come on back, Scooby! It's only a steamed lobster!
Scooby got the last laugh on that lobster, huh? This is actually pretty grim for a cartoon made for children, isn't it? It may not have been the same lobster from the beginning, but anyone watching in the audience would have seen the same animal, or another just like it, alive and kicking 20 minutes earlier. Now dead and steaming. This would be like Scooby visiting a farm and getting chased by a steer, only to have a farmer butcher it later and treat the gang to a large steak dinner. And that's my ranking of the villains from the 5th set of episodes of the first season of the Scooby-Doo show, shown here along with the ones from my previous videos. Both the villains this time around earned the same mediocre score, but at least the episodes themselves were fun to watch. It was also interesting to see how both dealt with the villain exploiting religious superstitions, but only one felt the need to specifically state the religion being used. We're now over halfway through the first season of the Scooby-Doo show, but there's still a lot more to come in this series. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon below, but please only join if you're comfortable doing so. Patreon members receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a member, as well as a personal shout out in the next regular video produced after they join. Seriously, where did all that light come from? They were dozens of feet underground.